So we've seen some examples of organisms that can do photosynthesis, and right now at this lecture we're going to cover a little bit more about the process of photosynthesis. I understand this is something you probably covered in an earlier class, and you might have some feelings about that experience. So I'm going to try to present photosynthesis as a stripped down version, what I think is important for you to know, and hopefully some new angles that make it a little more memorable, a little more interesting for you. So shown on the title slide here, we have one of our photosynthetic organisms, this symbiosis between a fungus and an algae or cyanobacteria, otherwise known as a lichen. So this is one of our photosynthetic so-called organisms or symbiotic arrangements here. And how do they do it? What are they doing with that photosynthesis there? So if you learn nothing else about photosynthesis, you should know the basic equation for the molecules involved in photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide in, water in, and then in the presence of light, there's a chemical reaction that pieces together this multi-carbon molecule, and oxygen actually leaves as a waste product more or less here. So kind of the bigger picture, we talked earlier about carbon, this global concern these days with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the abundance of carbon, the release of carbon through burning fossil fuels. And that all connects to this process of photosynthesis. And carbon is kind of central to this. So two big takeaways from photosynthesis is that plants can use light energy to make energy in the form of like biochemical energy, and they also can use that light energy to make molecular structures, which are sort of bundles of energy. They're packed up with energy, and that energy can be released if somebody eats that. The plant breaks it down, they can use it for energy. If an animal eats a plant, they can use the sugar that the plant contained for energy. Obviously, these other parts, the other molecules on here are important to the process. We might end up focusing a little more on the carbon process of this. So the molecules are not balanced. You can do a balanced equation here. I try to focus on just the importance of the individual kinds of molecules and not the abundance of each one. So obviously you could balance out 6 carbon atoms to give you the 6 carbon atoms in the sugar molecule, but we're not going to worry about that just yet. Another way to look at photosynthesis, if you think about it happening in plants, where we're going to think about it a lot in this class, I think it's helpful to kind of zoom in and think about where this is happening. Well, photosynthesis happens inside of chloroplasts. So organisms need chloroplasts, at least our eukaryotic organisms need chloroplasts so that they can do photosynthesis. And it largely happens in these membranes here. So these membrane stacks that make up a lot of the space of a chloroplast. Chloroplasts are multiple within plant cells, and then they're found in different abundance depending on where in the plant you're looking. So parts of the plant that are more green are going to probably have more chloroplasts. Parts of the plant that are exposed to more light, that's where the plant will pack the chloroplasts so they can maximize the light capture and the energy production as a result of that. So we have the membrane stack inside of a chloroplast, chloroplast inside of a plant cell making up, in this case, a cross-section through a leaf. And then the leaf, of course, one of the organs of a dandelion plant, and an organ responsible for getting photosynthesis done for the most part. Okay, so doing photosynthesis largely happens in the leaves. Leaves are these big solar panels. Capturing light is important to being able to do photosynthesis, so leaves are broad and flat. They're very similar to the technology we use, or the shapes that we use to do light capture for solar energy if you're doing solar electrical generation. Big panels, right? Big surface area facing the sun. Same technology employed by leaves. And also, as we think about leaves, I want to think about the other ingredients required for photosynthesis. So what were the other ones? We needed light, and then the molecules were, your turn, water and carbon dioxide. So water is present where in the environment? For your typical plant, that water is available in the ground. So plants might get rained on from above, but they're not really using the water that drops onto their epidermis surface. They're going to use the water that they can get through the soil. So plants has roots. That's their kind of the specialty, is to grab water from the soil and pull it up to the plant where it can be used in photosynthesis. So this other part of the plant that's actually away from the light is largely responsible for getting the water that's going to be needed for photosynthesis. Other ingredients we'll talk about later, the pores on the leaves. So the leaves have space in there where they can open up to the atmosphere and allow gas in, and gas is the form that we encounter carbon dioxide. So water from the roots, carbon dioxide from the air, where it's quite abundant in the atmosphere, and all those ingredients together can help them to do photosynthesis. So not every organism can do photosynthesis, and I think probably a lot of organisms would, right? If you could just sit out in the sun, combine your suntan with your lunch, why not? That's basically what plants do. They're getting a suntan while they're making food using that sun energy. We lie out in the sun for too long, we get a sunburn, no food generated. So I guess my point there is that plants can't just generate, humans can't just generate food by being in the sun. Plants can, so they need to have these special abilities that enable that to happen. And it comes down to two big molecules. We're going to use these molecules as kind of the focus as we talk about photosynthesis. On the left is a molecule of chlorophyll. And I mentioned that before. That is the molecule that makes plants green. And it's very important. It's central to this process of gathering light energy and turning it into chemical energy. And the second molecule on the right, this is a big old molecule. It's a complex protein called rubisco. And rubisco has the job of grabbing the carbon dioxide molecules and using the energy from photosynthesis to slap those onto existing molecules. So we'll see these come into play. These are both found in photosynthetic organisms, and they're really both essential for this process of photosynthesis. They're not always completely identical, but fairly similar and definitely required. All right, so what's the deal with chlorophyll? We talked earlier about green being this signal that an organism might be doing photosynthesis. Organisms that are doing photosynthesis, by and large, are green. So what's up with the green? We see it in the algae, we see it in the liverworts, and when I have students live in the classroom, I like to ask them if they've ever had a drink of wheatgrass. I think maybe the fad has faded a little bit on wheatgrass, but it was a thing where they would grow some wheat seedlings and these young tender shoots of wheat, grow them up, cut them up, put them in a blender, and you would kind of just drink grass. Sure looks healthy, right? Nothing that tastes that bad can be bad for you. I had my time with wheatgrass. I think I'm done. You can still get it as a shot in your smoothie, I think. Chlorophyll, straight to the source. Okay, so chlorophyll, as we'll see, it has this property of absorbing light, and a lot of molecules are kind of indifferent to light. They don't absorb light. They don't have a particular color. Chlorophyll absorbs colors, and because of what it reflects this green color, and that's how we can tell that chlorophyll is present. So just a kind of a schematic of the molecule here, there it is. It would be located in a central location for photosynthesis. And in the presence of light, here's the first important thing plants can do, is they can split apart a water molecule. So water, if you remember, was one of the first ingredients in photosynthesis, really kind of the first ingredient. Water plus light plus chlorophyll, boom, allows that water molecule to be split apart. That takes energy, and it releases the oxygen. So again, chemical reaction not balanced, but oxygen is part of the water molecule, as are hydrogen molecules. These are hydrogen ions, otherwise known as protons. And another part of that is an electron. So proton, electron, and oxygen are released when this water molecule is split apart. And it's that energized electron that we're going to follow through this process a little bit. The chlorophyll molecule, in the process of getting this light energy, the chlorophyll molecule gets excited. And you might have learned about this in your chemistry classes. Excited molecules, they can change into a higher energy state and then release energy as fluorescence, or releasing energy in different forms. So you can kind of think of it as this molecule being, we actually do use the term excited, right? Hey, chlorophyll, calm down. What are you so excited about? I love light, man. So chlorophyll is excited. And what happens next? Well, it doesn't say excited forever. And in the process of coming down and returning to that lower energy state, it kicks out an electron, and that sort of higher energy electron is able to do some work down the process. So chlorophyll, the molecule, goes between high energy and low energy states. Getting exposed to light makes it go into the high energy state, and then releasing that electron puts it back into the low energy state. So the molecule doesn't really go anywhere, but it's important in sort of transferring that light energy into electron energy. And I guess also, while we're on this slide, something interesting to point out, that the oxygen is generated very early on in this process. So water is used early, and oxygen is made early in the process of photosynthesis. Okay, so I mentioned chlorophyll, the molecule goes between these energy states, and as it changes energy states, it releases that electron, but also photons of light in a process known as fluorescence. You probably learned in chemistry. So coming down from high energy, it kicks out a different light, and the light that chlorophyll fluoresces is different than the color that we see the molecule in visible light. It actually fluoresces this kind of blood red color. So the image on the left is in visible light, or white light as we call it, and the image on the right is this molecule with UV light being shined on it. It kind of highlights the fluorescence of the molecule in red. So same flask, same solution, different light, and in the right image, this is dark background, so you can really see that red come through. So just another, if you want to click on the video link here, this is a person who just took some grass and ground it up, strained it through, and got this grass extract. And again, with a laser beam, this is a laser beam pointed, and it's reflecting off the side of this beaker. And everywhere it's going through the green liquid, the beam comes back to us as red. So kind of interesting, this green, what we think of as a green molecule, also has a ability to fluoresce in the red spectrum. Okay, so I mentioned that chlorophyll is green. It's green because it's not really absorbing in the green part of the spectrum. So let's pay attention here to chlorophyll A. This is the chief chlorophyll. Chlorophyll A absorbs wavelengths of light in the blue-purple area of the spectrum, and also absorbs over here in the red-orange part of the spectrum. And this just happens to be a property of the molecule. Molecules that absorb light, they absorb certain wavelengths differently than others. These are the wavelengths that it absorbs. And those are the wavelengths that it would be able to use for that light energy. So these particular wavelengths would excite the chlorophyll molecule, make it able to do that process that we saw in the earlier slide. The colors that are not absorbed, it's not really just only green, but basically through the combination of what is absorbed by your typical plant and reflected by your typical plant, green is what ends up being reflected, and that's what that looks like to our eyes. General color of leaves being kind of green. So in addition to chlorophyll, there are these other molecules called antenna or accessory pigments. A pigment is a molecule that absorbs light and therefore has a color to us. So to our eyes in what we call the visible spectrum, what humans can see. Chlorophyll has this particular absorbance, and other molecules absorb different colors of the visible spectrum. So there's also chlorophyll B. It's kind of a secondary pigment for photosynthesis, as are these molecules called carotenoids. And over here, some examples of carotenoids in the molecular form, beta-carotene, and then also some examples of the colors that you get from these. So these are just fruits and vegetables grouped by their visible color, and highlighting the carotenoid molecules that are giving them their color. So carotenoid is related to beta carotene, which hopefully reminds you of carrots, but also some other orange members of the plant group. Xanthophylls are a kind of carotenoid, and they are more in the yellow end of the spectrum. So plants can produce slight variations on the pigment molecule theme, and as these molecules change, they absorb different colors of light to give us different absorption can be helpful for photosynthesis, and then also just different visible colors. Sometimes that's present as a signaling for animals, as in many of these fruits and vegetables. So antenna pigments are can be involved in photosynthesis, but they're not like central to the process of photosynthesis. So the very center, what they call the reaction center of photosynthesis, these are those chlorophyll A molecules, like the quintessential, the most important chlorophyll molecules. The other molecules, this idea of them being antenna, right? It's kind of a late old technology at this point, but I guess antennas show up here and there, sort of increasing the surface area to pick up a signal. In this case, the signal is this light energy. And these other molecules that are not chlorophyll A can still pick up light energy and kind of pass it around among themselves. So these antenna pigments can, what we're seeing here is sort of bouncing light energy between themselves. And ultimately that light energy bounces toward the chlorophyll A molecules, those central molecules as part of the process. So by using antenna pigments, plants can absorb colors that are not immediately useful to chlorophyll A, but then those molecules can kind of pass on the energy to chlorophyll A. So increase the amount of energy that can be made for every amount of light that shows on a plant. So a little interesting connection, I think. You might have encountered some of these names as you think about human nutrition. So over on the left, we've got beta carotene is a plant pigment. And then that molecule can be processed into or is related to these other molecules that are important for human nutrition. So vitamin A, otherwise known as retinol, is very similar to beta carotene. Can be made by breaking down beta carotene. And that molecule ends up being a component, so through a little bit of chemical modification, is a central component in this molecule here called rhodopsin. So my label's a little bit off. This rhodopsin label should be over here on this protein. So the coiled parts indicate that this is a protein, but inside of the protein is this pigment molecule, and rhodopsin is one of the proteins that are responsible for human vision. So your genes, your genetics can build the rhodopsin protein, but genetics on their own can't put that retinol molecule in there that makes it respond to light. So we need sort of extra additional components to that. Things that we call vitamins are essential nutrients that you need to get from your food. So somebody, if they have a certain diet, they can be deficient in these vitamins. And certain vitamins, if you're not getting them, they can affect your vision and cause you not to have vision under certain circumstances. Color vision or low light vision sometimes suffers. Another way to think about this is you are what you eat, right? You eat something that is orange or colorful, and through the processing of that colorful thing, kind of like the color molecules end up in your eye and let you see colors. Pretty bonkers, I think. All right, take a little break and start a new video here. Bop.